And good afternoon, everyone. It's really great to see everybody here. I'm going to take a very different approach to maybe the presentations you're going to hear here today or that you've heard, and we're really going to look at one of the areas that has fascinated me over the last couple of years is really understanding the behavioral aspects of cybersecurity. And APIs are a really interesting one. I was talking with Dan about this one, and really it occurred to me that our APIs act very similar. No surprise to anybody, but act very similar to humans. Um, and we treat them very similar to humans. So it occurred to me that one of the things that we needed to talk about was how APIs operate similar to humans so that we can address some of the strategies and concerns and things that we maybe need to address as by thinking of an API as a human. So I really started to look at that and found some really interesting things, which I'm excited to share with you all today. Um, so joining us on this journey, though, today is going to be our API buddy. Um, just meet our API, Dan Barahona. Um, I will tell everybody this was a fun one. I took took ChatGPT and asked it to uh, give me what its representation of what an API would look like if it was human. I thought this was a really good one, um, and I thought we could have a little fun with this one. So, you know, the thing to keep in mind is that really, when you look at it, um, an API um, really has a simple functional um, look to it. It's nothing flashy. It's meant to be clean. It's meant to be organized. It's meant to have a lot of pockets. So, a lot of endpoints, a lot of methods, a lot of things it can do. So in that respect, it's nothing like any other, any resemblance to anybody living or not is purely coincidental. Um, it has very well documented, or it should have very well documented instructions on what it's going to do. um, it's going to have a name tag. It's going to have some identification to it. Um, APIs, when we think about it, APIs are really very well structured. They're meant to do very specific things, and they're meant to be very literal. You give it an instruction, and it follows that instruction. It can be reliable. It will do everything you expect, but it's going to be a little stubborn. It's not going to be very inflexible or very flexible, but it's predictable, which is good, and it allows us the ability to really anticipate what it's going to do. Um, it prefers one specific set of questions. So really, our API as a human is really an almost an idealized version of what we would want an actual human to do. So, excuse me. We will. So, APIs, when we think about it, really APIs communicate kind of similar to humans, just like we use language. An API uses code. And what's really important about this um, is that it requires a specific set of grammar or specific syntax. It's, you know, when we communicate things, if all I do is stood here and grunted and groaned, you wouldn't know what I'm asking for. You wouldn't have any idea. I if I talk and I don't pause and then I continue and then I start adding and then I start continuing on and continuing on, you're gonna struggle. So I need to add grammar. So I add a pause and I stop talking and I wait for you to catch up. And I'm putting letters together in a format that makes sense to you. The other thing that's important to understand is that APIs are also prone to miscommunications. You type the syntax incorrectly, you get an error. Just like if I said, um, you know, uh, if I said to you, the 5-7, you're going to go, what? That doesn't make any sense. Just because you put together words doesn't mean you actually accomplished anything. So, but when you think about it, an API request is really no different than any human request we make. I'd like a coffee with cream. You go to Starbucks, you go to whatever, say I'd like a coffee with cream. In an API, you're going to put in, post order item coffee add on cream, and the computer is going to understand that. Now, I wouldn't go into Starbucks and go post order item coffee add on cream and expect to get what I want. Back to that point of, but we have a very set syntax, just like we have very formal structures for our sentences. Excuse me. So let's talk about an example. The scenario could be to get the current weather in New York City. You would use you have to use an HTTP method, in this case, get. You have to have an endpoint. You have to have query parameters, just like you would in a human request. We follow social rules, so we're used to following rules. We have, please always use please and thank you. Always, we don't yell our answers. Yes, Marcos, I would love to see people like, if nothing else out of this one, if I start walking around and hearing people ordering food and beverages like an API, I am going to declare a massive win. That is going to be the most fun thing. I'm going to start the new TikTok craze. Order your food and beverages like an API and see how well the orders come out. But the point of the matter is APIs operate under rules, and that's an important thing to understand, because when you understand the rules, when you understand how to abide by the rules, you'll get good results, very similar to the way we have rules as humans. The other thing to keep in mind is that API is very similar to humans. We have very specialized roles. Maybe you're a father, or maybe you're a SOC analyst. People have jobs. We have specific roles we play in society, or in any transaction. I'm a buyer, I'm a seller, I'm a consumer, I'm a producer. APIs have responsibilities as well. And we have to understand, I can't ask a weather API to balance my checkbook. That's not its purpose. That's not its responsibility. That's not the job it has. And that means um, teamwork is necessary. You have to have APIs. Your APIs have to collaborate together in order to accomplish things, or you have to make you may have to leverage a couple of APIs to do something. Well, that also means that you're dependent on each person doing their job, each API doing its job. And APIs get overloaded, they get, they fail, they have issues, and it's understanding all of that. Um, the other thing that's important to understand is that at our foundation, at our core, we are taught to trust, but we are taught to understand, to seek the identity. From early days of humanity, we were very big on, are you the right person? Like, are you part of my tribe? Are you part of my cave? Do you belong here? Can you prove you are a human versus a lion or a mastodon or whatever? And from, again, the earliest days of humanity, we've used some version of ID and password. So we should expect our APIs are going to work that same way. But the way we treat our human identities, I don't give my driver's license to just anybody to use. We shouldn't expect our APIs to have their identity, to be sharing their identities. The key to security is trusting the way in which you share the information. Security isn't about preventing the transmission of information. It's about ensuring that the information that is shared between authorized parties. The other thing to keep in mind, and this is an interesting one, and I'm going to go off on a little bit of a tangent here because this is an area of technology that I've been really focusing on lately that's been really interesting. But we have to remember that APIs are going to make mistakes. They're going to have errors. And we need to be aware of that. We need to be cognizant of it. We need to understand that they're going to occur. The tangent that I'm going to go off on is I've been doing a lot of research recently into technology adoption. And what's really interesting is um, y- for those who stayed here, I'll actually give you something you might actually talk about in the other track. They might be talking in the other track about right now. But there's a really interesting concept, which is with autonomous vehicles. If you think about it, when we have a car accident, when two humans are involved in a car accident, you'll hear people say, oh, it could have happened to anybody, it's an accident, it could have, like, anything, it's just fluke, it could have happened, it could have been me, could have just as easily been me. Except that when an autonomous vehicle has an accident, it's, oh my god, the machine has failed. And this is an interesting concept for what I'm talking about here, which is we view failures of technology as a flaw in the technology and not something that is a part of the experience. And that's why I want to point out that we have to consider that APIs have errors. APIs fail. APIs have trouble finding things. APIs can't exceed their rules. Um, you know, th that's an okay thing. Yes, we gotta fix it, we've got to address it, but understand that errors are going to happen, and that an error in an API doesn't mean you need to go, "Oh my god, the API is total crap," We hear about, "Oh my god, somebody compromised an API," and we're like, "Oh, this is like, the machine is the problem. The machine is failure. The machine is such a huge factor in this," as opposed to just, hey, it's something that happens. Like, let's not lose our mind. Why does it matter? You know, AI APIs, remember, enable seamless user experiences. They're meant to, but we also have to understand that how many times, we again, to the point I was just making, if you had a user experience that was purely human to human and it wasn't the best experience, you have a set of emotion that we don't typically prescribe to APIs, even though APIs are doing very human things. The important thing as well is that humanizing the tech actually improves our understanding. If you can look at an API and understand that it's, acting, hey, it's a child, it's doing what it needs to be doing, it's following the directions it was given. Um, and I need to be very specific. I need to be very clear. I've got a 12-year-old son. I will tell you, if I don't break down and explain very specifically and in very deep, very organized words what I want him to do, it's not going to happen. If I try to give him too much information at once, he's not going to do things. If I go clean your room, take your medicine, eat your food, feed the dogs, fill up the water, like, I'm lucky if he's going to do one of those things at that point. You know, so breaking it down and understanding that you have to treat an API very similar is an important thing. The other thing is, it's also important to remember that we often overlook APIs. We often don't think about the way in which we're communicating, but yet you'll hear stories. And the example I'll give you is, we've all heard, or we've all been hearing about this concept of prompt engineering. We've talked about it. There is no, it's not at all coincidental, the comments that were made by Sam Altman a couple weeks ago about the fact that that please and thank you are causing OpenAI um, that are causing OpenAI trouble. The fact that people are asking please and thank you, they're using manners, is causing OpenAI to be more deliberative in its process. How often do you find that when you ask somebody, hey, please, will you do this for me? They're more deliberate, they're more focused, they do what they can on this. Um, that is certainly something to keep in mind. Um, and for the comment, yeah, I don't blame you for needing the recording to re-listen to this and digest it. Uh, that's a common occurrence, and it's Dan's fault for inviting me because he knew that this was what I was going to talk about. But yes, it is being recorded, and I'm also happy to have conversations about it. I'll share some contact info here in a few minutes. So, I want to talk for a few minutes about the corollaries between behavioral science and APIs and really talk about some of the science behind it. And this is, for me, is interesting. And I think you'll see why this topic is so important. So, the first one we're going to talk about is communication theory. So, there's a concept that, we communicate in specific ways and that every communication means something. Even babies who you'll hear babble, they're doing a form of communication. We rely on language, syntax, feedback from communication, and APIs communicate through standard formats as well. Again, if me Tarzan, you Jane, um, it is not as effective as my name is Tarzan, your name is Jane. We understand it a lot better when you've given it good language, you've used proper language, proper syntax. There's feedback that we get as well, just like you'll get an error message if you didn't phrase something correctly or it won't do what it was supposed to do. One of the other interesting areas, and this is an area I've spent a lot of time looking at, is the idea of cognitive load. One of the great things about APIs and one of the important reasons why we need to think about how can we leverage APIs is APIs, if they're well designed, can actually reduce cognitive load. Why? If I know that I have to ask the question using very specific syntax, then I don't have to think about those syntax every time. There's a formula. It's really easy for all of us to very easily calculate certain mathematical equations. Why? There's a formula. If I want to figure out the slope of a line, I know it's rise over run. I know that every time. I don't have to think about it. If I want to calculate the Pythagorean theorem, I know what there's a formula. So um and Marcus, you make a really good point as well. Humanizing tech can also lead to performing unintended actions. Um, but it's also important to understand that when we program something to do something, we may we there's a human programming it. So a human is going to build their own psychology into it and their own biases into it. So understanding that it's going to act the way it's been programmed is an important thing to understand to make sure that it's programmed correctly. And yes, understanding that an API is also subject to many of the same manipulations. If I ask it enough time, to, if I prompt it enough times, or if I ask it enough in a manipulative way, I may be able to get it to do something it's not supposed to. Um, there is an element of trust and an element of security in APIs as well, just like there's an element of trust in humans. And that's important to understand. It's key. We only share information and delegate people tasks as humans to people we trust or people we have confidence in or people we know are going to get it done. Same thing with an API. It should have that same level of trust built into it, especially if you're getting people to adopt its use. Humans also, we set boundaries, we set scopes, we have limits to what we allow things to happen. APIs have the same thing. They have parameters to them. Um, the other thing is that APIs, we can think of APIs, and really we should think about APIs as having social roles and division of labor. You don't want an API that can do the entire process because that API is now susceptible to either overload, burnout, manipulation. There's no check on it, etc. Um, so having those defined roles and defining those and documenting those is important. Um, Humans, again, we've talked about error, and I want to make sure we leave some time. So I want to finish up in the next 2 to 3 minutes. But we've talked about error handling. There is an element of emotional intelligence, believe it or not, in an API. It's not going to operate. It's got to operate with security and what have you. So all of this is meant to show that when we view APIs, when we view anything we do in tech through a behavioral science lens, it makes it easier to identify. I've seen in the chat, people are already identifying areas where there needs to be extra security. the, when we view it as a human, when we, the contrary of, the positive aspect of anthropomorphizing an API is that you can actually get it, you can actually identify better, um, better approaches. Henry asks a really great question. Don't APIs inherit the strengths and weaknesses of their creators? Absolutely. But how is that any different than a child learning right and wrong from their parent? We learn from our environment. Same thing. So the same. All I'm saying is we can apply many of the same things that we apply in our daily life to our APIs and actually make them more secure. We are often focused on an API, just can it do what it's expected to do? And that's great, except that it's programmed by a human and it will act like a human based on how it's programmed. So, final thoughts. APIs are the human touch point in a machine world. They listen, they speak, they act, and they even mess up just like us. The key takeaway and the real thing I want everybody to take away from all of this is to really start seeing APIs as teammates, not tools. That's where you're going to see the real value. That's why humanizing this is such a great thing. I'll share my contact info. My LinkedIn, my website. Uh, Dan is aware because Dan's been a huge supporter of me, but I've got a book coming out later this year on behavioral science as it applies to us as cybersecurity practitioners and all of the things that go into how we make decisions and how we approach cybersecurity strategies. And would love to take any questions that you might have. I know Dan's probably got a ton. And anyone who wants to get a copy of Dan Barahona, the API. I believe APIsec University is going to be selling them now as little 3D
we
dolls. Uh,
we were looking for a mascot for AppSec U. Maybe
yeah,
you've just finished that off for us though. I appreciate you making me so much thinner and younger.
yeah.
And multiple like pockets for my you know reading glasses and calculator and everything. But no, I mean what a
That
super
Dan
fascinating
actually
conversation.
that Dan actually behaves, and I think Henry Joseph just came up with the game winner, a Dan Barahona API bobblehead.
No, nobody wants that. Nobody wants that. Um, My goodness. Well,
So Marcos asked a question. If I think we've got a couple minutes, right, Dan?
yeah, go. Yeah, we do.
So, do any of these behaviors change through LLM incorporation as it's thought to be more systematic? Um, Actually, LLMs probably increase the need to think about the behavioral science aspects because an LLM, at the end of the day, if we really think about it behind the scenes, an LLM is operating as an API on steroids because now I can prompt it using natural language. And we've all used LLMs where you say this something to it multiple times and finally it goes, "Oh, okay, that must be true." If I tell my 12-year-old the sky is orange enough times, he's going to go, "Oh yeah, the sky is orange." He's going to start repeating that. So LLMs, I think, just uh, add kerosene to the need to understand the behavioral science aspects of things.
Well, I mean, couldn't you say that LLMs are trained with anthropomorphic data?
They are absolutely,
So
absolutely.
they're going to inherently act somewhat human?
Yeah, they are, and I mean, the whole idea is the whole thing that we're pushing for with all of the use of AI and all of the use of the LLMs is we want it to act more human. But the problem is we want it to act more human, but we don't stop and think about what does that really mean. Um,
Yeah.
you know,
Yeah.
it we've all seen the documentary with Arnold Schwarzenegger. It doesn't work well in the end. Um, when we
Documentary.
when we I'm glad you picked up on that, Dan. Thanks.
Took
I
me a
was
sec. Took
I
me a
was
sec.
afraid somebody wasn't going to pick up on the it being a documentary. No, but we talk about APIs and wanting all of these automations to act more human. We talk about non-human identities, but yet we feel like we've got to treat non-human identities separately. All of these things you know digital representations of human actions, and we need to keep that in mind. So, this has been really great. I really do appreciate the opportunity.
Yeah,
And
no, man. I knew having you on would be a bit of a risk, but it worked out okay. So
why
thank you.
why a risk? Because I'm prone to flights of fancy. No,
Because I just know you too well, man. No,
I make your life fun. Don't
yes, you
lie.
do. No, you're always invited. You got a permanent invitation. Lots of people want your slides, the replay. Yeah, that was a bit mind bendy. I'm gonna have to rewatch it myself. But thank you,
Absolutely.
man. I appreciate you being here, dude. And
Absolutely.
I
Thank you
look
for
forward to your
having
book.
me as
We'll bring you
always.
back.
And thank you to your entire team. I can't say enough about APIsec University. I've gotten to see some of the things. And I mean, this conference, I literally remember sitting with you, a year and a half ago, talking about what this could look like. And the fact that
That's
we've
right.
got, 700 people sitting in a room listening to me on a Wednesday afternoon or whatever time, like
Yep.
that's mind blowing, and this is great. And I just encourage everybody. Dan and the whole team here. They are just so appreciative and so good at what they do. So
No, appreciate that, man.
thank
Right
you.
on. Well, we'll talk soon, especially when
Sounds
your book
great.
comes
Thank
out.
you.
See you, man.
Yep.
All right.